Now, forms are a very common element that you need to know about in HTML. You're going to use it a lot, especially as you learn back-end development. Okay, so forms are literally everywhere, right? If we do a Google search, what are we doing? We're filling out a form. Okay, if you want to create an account at facebook.com, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to fill out a form. If you want to log in somewhere, you have to fill out a form, as you can see up here, right? So if you start to surf around the web, you'll notice forms are literally all over the web. It's one of the most common ways we interact with the web. Okay, humans fill out these forms and then they click these buttons and that form data gets sent off to some server somewhere to be processed. Okay, even when you're uploading an image, a lot of times you're actually technically filling out a form and sending that file up to a server. Okay, so forms are all over the web. Next time you are surfing around, try to be conscious of how much you're filling out search forms or filling out a Facebook profile post, like your wall post, or a Twitter tweet, anything like that. Going to LinkedIn and you want to create an account so that you can network with individuals for your career, you're usually going to be filling out forms. Okay, so let's learn how we can create forms in our HTML. What I'm going to do is add the form just somewhere on this document. I'm going to do it right after our ordered list here. So I'm going to create some new lines. Right here, I'm going to add an opening form tag and then a closing form tag. And remember to pause often so that when you're copying the code, you separate that from when you are listening to these explanations. You want to write the code by hand to get that muscle memory, but you want to pause often so that you listen instead of missing the explanations in this series while you're copying out the code. Okay, you don't want to get into the habit of just copycatting your way through the course. You're not going to learn much that way. So pay attention closely. Okay, so we've got our opening and closing form tags. If I save my file and go over here and refresh, you'll see nothing happens. That doesn't really do anything. These, we just need to prepare our form. Now, inside of here is where we'll actually get the form fields. This is how we do them. We say input, and this is another self-closing tag, just like the image tag and just like our line break tags. Okay, so we have an input tag, so there's no separate closing tag for it. And what we can do is right here, we'll add an attribute. We'll just say, you know what, let's make this the type attribute. We'll set it to text. We'll make this a text field input. If I go over here and I refresh, there you go. You can see HTML kind of rendering out the default look. This browser renders the default look of a text field, and you can add some text in there. Now, this form isn't going to do anything, obviously, but that's how we create the front end kind of user interface look for a text field. There are other types of input tags. You can do input and set the type, and this time we can make it something like password. If I save that and I go over here and I refresh, this one does text, but this one does password. Okay, so that looks starting to look like a login form, right? We can also have a button. So we can do input, we can set it to be type equals, and in here we say submit for buttons. Okay, and if I go back over here after saving this file and I refresh, there we go. There's the browser's default rendering of a button. Okay, again, clicking it doesn't really do anything. It just kind of refreshes the page, but it's not actually going to submit this form information anywhere on the internet. Now remember, these are self-closing tags, so you can add the optional trailing / right there if you want. It's totally optional. Now there's other types of buttons too. You can actually have the button tag like this, and you could put something like sign up or log in, let's say, inside. And this is not a self-closing tag, so you need that separate closing button tag. If I save this and we refresh, there you go. Now we have this button here and this button here coming from that line. Now, as you can see, it's all kind of lining up horizontally here, and that's no good. A lot of times with forms, you want to break things out, especially your buttons in different lines or whatnot. You could do that with some line break tags. Again, these are self-closing tags, so we could just add line breaks and copy and paste these after all of our tags like that. If we go over here and we refresh, there we go. We've got it broken out now on different lines. And again, we could use CSS to style this and space it out to look a little bit better. Now, there are some other types of tags. So I'll add another line break here. And I added the optional /. Remember, that's optional with these self-closing tags. And then right here, while I'm still inside of this form tag, I could add something like this, input, and this time we could do a type and set it equal to the checkbox, like that. If I save that and I refresh, there we go. We've got a little checkbox for when you want to select different options. Now, sometimes you want them to choose between one or more options and they can only choose one of the options in a set. And that way you can do input, type, and you can set that to radio. Okay, that's what we call a radio button in HTML. And that's where you see these kinds of circular buttons like that. And that's usually when you want to pick one out of a group and they can only pick one and they can't do multiple selections. Checkboxes are useful for multiple selections. You know, when you line them up like that in a group, like this, and you can select multiple things. But radio buttons are ideal for options where you can only choose one out of a group. Now we can also do the select tag for drop-down menus, right? So if we go over here and do select, and then we want a closing separate select tag here. Let me scroll down so you can see this entire form from here to here. This is what we're working with. So we've added these select tags. In here we can specify some options. So I tab inward because I'm nesting further in, and I add the option tag. And then a closing option tag. Okay, so these are not self-closing. The self and the options, they have separate closing tags. And let's say I was making a credit card processing form. Well, we would need an expiration date for the customer. So we could do something like put years in here, right? So 2017. Or you could do a drop-down menu for selecting their state or the country of origin. You've seen those kinds of drop-down menus all throughout the web. So you'd want to have multiple options like this for the customer. So if I save this and we go over here and we refresh, there we go. Now we have a drop-down menu with these options. Now, a lot of times with these form fields, you also have to have additional attributes. Let's start with this first one here. This isn't a totally useless tag, as you can see. When we put it here alone, we didn't see anything show up. The form tag is important because it kind of encapsulates, it holds all of the data that a customer would input or a user would input inside of these form fields. It encapsulates it all inside of the form tag. And the form tag is important because you can encapsulate all of that and send the data somewhere. Okay, we can send it to a server somewhere and have a machine, a computer, process that information, save it to a database or charge a customer's credit card or whatever. So how do you get it to send to a location? Well, you have to specify in that opening form tag the action attribute. It's probably the most important tag or attribute in the form tag here. Okay, so action, and you put inside of the action a URL. Okay, it could be something like a URL where you have your website, so whatever your website is, .com/processing.php or processing.rb, or just some file somewhere on your server at whatever your website is. Okay, I just put a placeholder kind of dummy website name here. You'd need a URL that points to a file somewhere on the internet that can process this form. So somewhere on a server that processes this form. So then when someone hits submit, this form stuff, all of these form fields, anything encapsulated in here will get sent off through the internet to this particular address. So that's what the action attribute is for. It's a very important attribute that you need to have. And a lot of times you also add this method attribute. Whenever you're submitting data over a form and you want to save stuff on a server somewhere, a lot of times you'll also have method and set that to post, just like that. That's one of the HTTP methods, okay? Post. So if I refresh this, you'll see the form still looks the same and everything, but if I were to submit this form now by hitting that submit button, it would want to go to a URL like this and post this data into the server there. Okay, so these are some important attributes that you have to have for your forms to work. Now, a lot of times when you are submitting data to a server, you often want to include an attribute in each of the fields called the name attribute. Okay, so we add another attribute there and we set it to name, and you name the type of value that's going in here. So let's say we were collecting the first name of a customer here. We'd want to name this properly for the server like that, so that the machine that this is being sent to can figure out what